Hi everyone, my name is Tiffany. Welcome back, or welcome if you've never been here before. And today I'm going to share all of my thoughts on everything that I picked up in the month of March. So, I normally come to you after a few books. I like to come to you fresh off the page, but this month I have had some technical difficulties and trouble recovering the audio for that. So I'm gonna say I get to refilm this, because if this isn't fun, I wouldn't be doing it. So we're gonna start with The Wolf and the Wallflower by Stacy Reid. This had the most unique historical romance plot. Okay, it was a little bonkers, being that our heroine was raised as Jules Southby, a man, and she was able to keep this secret from society and from her own father with the help of her mother. And I loved how this really showcased the access that granted her. She's been able to get an education and work with her father, who is a mind doctor. And at this time, psychology is really just emerging. And her father gets called in to help our hero, James Winters, who was lost in the Canadian wilderness at the age of 18. He's just been found. And so now his mother is desperately trying to re-assimilate him back into society. This is at a time when PTSD was unheard of, let alone held space for, and also at a time where upholding propriety meant their livelihood. So there's a lot of stakes also riding on Jules's family when it comes to this evaluation and this going well. And I loved how when she arrives, James instantly knows that she's a woman. And it's not by sight, it's by smell. I just felt like that was incredibly primal, especially being that that's what his mother aims to eradicate from him. And what I loved about this is that they have a working relationship. James agrees to only work with her. And I love how the task in this book is inherently for them to get to know each other. They're both sort of captives of society. And the vulnerability, the building of trust between them, this was incredibly romantic. I swooned at the slow pacing of trust between them. It was also a bit of a slow burn. The steam was, I love, like timid and inevitable steam. That's how this felt. And they really related too on familial trauma. If there's any bit of a red herring, I would say that with this book, because Stacy Reid does a really good job of enriching her characters with these sort of like soul wounds, these familial wounds. And I love how just her love interests meet that within each other. And in this book, I really did wish that in the third act, a lot of what was built up, at least between Jules and her father, was dealt with. But at the end of the day, like, I ultimately ended up rating this 4.5 stars just because of the romance between them. That eclipsed everything, any red herring I could really have. Like, this was a very unique reading experience. The way that she's sort of able to come out as herself, so to speak, in the end, I really enjoyed it, and it was the first read of the month. So I was starting off pretty strong there. Then I ended up picking up, after the readathon, Hawke by Jessie Hall. First and foremost, this was sent to me by Cynthia from Kindle After Dark. Thank you so much. All of the books that you've been sending me have been hitting, and it's incredibly kind of you. It's brought me so much joy, and I loved, this is a dark, romance. Our hero is an ex-con. We're dealing with a forced proximity situation by way of roommates, and I'll say, it may be a trigger for you. There is cheating. For me, I have always found cheating to be challenging in books because I need to have a good enough reason for why our main character hasn't left. And in this book, I think that she accomplished that. The financial dependence that Nicole has on her fiance just completely took me out. I mean, let's just be real here. Have we noticed the cost of living going up? I just don't think I can read another heroine in a billionaire romance that's just not willing to take the hero's help out of pride. But I think that Jessie Hall did a really good job of convincing me as to why Nicole is trapped. So I will backtrack a little bit here. Okay, Nicole is living with her fiance, Patrick. He's from a prominent family. and he really runs the ship of their life. She's taken care of monetarily, but she isn't supported emotionally, and she isn't satisfied sexually. And the fact that he really runs the ship is really made evident in him not disclosing to her that Hawke will be living with them. In fact, their meet cute was absolutely hilarious, okay? She walks in on him sleeping with another woman, and through that awkwardness, she learns that Hawke will now be staying with them because he actually owns the home. And now she's being forced to live, okay, with this chiseled body, severe staring eye, tattooed man with a sex life that she can only dream of. And what I loved about this were all of the domestic moments between them. I also really enjoyed, because we're dealing with a cheating situation, was the snowball of Patrick's villainy. That's all I'm gonna say. The reveals and the twists and turns in this book completely took me out. Hawke was incredibly alpha, but he's also the cinnamon roll that's misunderstood. And all of the assumptions that they had of each other are slowly chiseled away as they spend more time with each other. And the way that he validates how she's being dismissed in her relationship really highlights how she hasn't been voicing her concerns. And what also made this work in terms of her not leaving Patrick was that the heroine in this book tries to communicate. Time and time again, she is shut down. And I just love how she's able to find herself through her relationship with Hawke, which I just loved. It's just a lot of heated, like, how dare you show me what I can have and who I could be between them. It was a lot. And so I thoroughly enjoyed it. Like I said, the plot gets a little bit bonkers. The reveals on what is actually happening and the dynamic between Hawke and Patrick just made my heart break for Hawke. So I ended up rating this ultimately 4 stars, and I had such a fun time with it. I mean, she had no chance. Like, I knew that from the jump. She had no chance. Anyway, next, I'm sorry, let me just come off of that. That was just, it was luscious. Like, Hawke was, I'm obsessed with him. Anyway, next I read Taken to Voraxia by Elizabeth Stevens. I finally finished this. I actually started it during the readathon, and I finally picked it up again. And I loved the heroine in this book, Miari, because she's brilliant. She was a tinker, she was an engineer, and she's also a hybrid alien from a moon that is invaded every 3 years. And the women on this moon are kidnapped by aliens that are from another planet. And at the beginning of this book, the king and leader of said planet comes to the moon to stop the exploitation that's happening. And when he's there, he sees Miari, and immediately he knows that she's his mate. I love how, like, possessive and forward he is from the very beginning. He's hell-bent on convincing her that her place is by his side. And I also enjoyed how altruistic Miari was. She knows that she can placate his affections for her and negotiate, quite frankly, basic human rights for her people. And when he realizes this, I loved throughout this book how he demonstrates his devotion to her. When he realizes how her people have been enslaved and exploited, he immediately gets into action and tries to uncover how this happened, to hunt down those who are responsible for the atrocities carried out against her people. And I also like that he places her at the helm of this effort as well. Not only does he adorn her with his affection, he does so with power. And he was obsessed with her. And I also loved that he didn't feel entitled to her love just because they were fated and because of his ranking. He really walks it out in this book. I'm incredibly excited, okay, about the future books. Some of the side characters, this is a very diverse world in scope. It really reads like a fantasy. Oh, it would stand out. And this actually makes Elizabeth Stevens officially on my roster. This is the second book that I've read from her that absolutely hit. So I loved it. I rated it 4 stars, and I think I'm going to be reading this series with Avery. I'm really excited about it. After that, I think I might have to refer to my Airtable. We're moving in. I can do a walk through. quarterly now. I can do a walkthrough of my Airtable setup if you care at all. Let me know in the comments and I will do that. Trying to wrap up this March content, okay? Next, I read Sweet Vengeance by Viano Oniomoh. This was a recommendation from Kimberly Lemming. She was ranting and raving about this book, so I had to pick it up. And this is about a heroine that summons a demon in order to help her kill the man that assaulted her. So there are trigger warnings for sexual assault in this book. And really, she's summoning him for a bit of paranormal cleanup. She aims to carry this out herself. And I think that this book did an incredible job of showcasing all of what was robbed from her, being that she still has to face her attacker every day at work and act as if nothing ever happened. And she's ready to take her agency back. And I loved this romance because even though it's really about them plotting her attacker's murder, it's incredibly swoony. I mean, the way that the hero sees her, the way that he describes her body as well, I was a little shocked because I was like, I'm not going to say that on the internet, but I felt seen. Okay, let's just say that. I felt seen in these pages, the way that he described her body, and how he is so enamored by her spirit absolutely took me out. He's also a virgin hero with a harrowing backstory himself, and there are a lot of magical and practical reasons for why they can't be together that are bound up in this, and yet they fall. I thought this was beautifully done. I loved the world that we're set in. Okay, also the magical quagmires, and it is violent. She does level her attacker at the neck. I won't tell you how, but I thought that this was beautifully done and I rated it 5 stars. It was a 5-star novella for me, okay? Absolutely stand out. I loved it. Next, I read The Escape Artist by Kitty Thomas. I got this recommendation from Diana and the Book Hunt. This is a recommendation that I got during the Romance Takeover Readathon. And this is a BDSM dark captive romance where the heroine was kidnapped for 43 days and she aims to capture her captor and keep him in the same heinous conditions that she was made to endure. And so she kidnaps Ari, the hero, at the beginning of this book. And I will say that this is a sort of table turn romance. That's all I can really say because of the plot. I don't want to reveal anything, but we do start this book out knowing that Ari is a dom. In fact, he has associations with what he calls the Kinky Mafia, which is a play club that's into 24-hour kink despite the submissives being willing, and he's not willing to go that far. So I liked how that sort of telegraphed in the beginning, and we know when he's being held captive that he's dominant, and at first he doesn't take her seriously, and then he realizes that Claire has been hurt somewhere along the way, and he aims to plead his innocence. And I'll leave it there, but what I will say is his time caged really teaches him what it's like to be on the other side of the kink that he enjoys. I think that everything that is unlocked between them is ushered in through the kink. They feed each other and soothe each other's edges in this book. I was not expecting the twists and turns. I was not expecting the dynamic in this to go the way that it did, and I'm intrigued. This is a series. There are other characters that are introduced, a friend of his, and so I'm interested in continuing on. I ultimately rated this 4 stars, and I did enjoy that there is an emotional aspect and how through kink they're both able to heal. Okay, so I'm really happy that I got this recommendation. Thank you, Diana. This is really good, and I think I found a new series. After which I read Sunset Springs by Kacen Callender. I read this for the Trans Rights Readathon, which I was late for the official signups, but I still wanted to participate by picking up trans authors, books that feature trans characters, and donate something. And so I did. I saw this book on Robin from Paperbacks and Planners TBR, and I really enjoyed it. It's an Audible original short with Black trans representation where our hero is traveling back to the small town that he grew up in that is predominantly white and closed-minded in order to take care of his mother, which involves lending a hand at her business, which is how he's reunited with Jackson, who he knew in high school. And I loved how Jackson held space for Charlie's lived experience as a trans Black man. The communication that centered around transphobia, racism, and also a life that's deemed a success. Because Charlie left for the big city and Jackson chose to stay in his small town despite the struggle of everyone's opinions about who he is. And I also enjoyed how Charlie was very vocal about how, yes, he and Jackson did parallel in their struggle of homophobia within the small town, but there are also areas where their experiences did not intersect. And again, I really enjoyed how Jackson held space for that. And I also wasn't expecting the ending. It was a little unconventional. I will say it was inclusive in how Charlie doesn't have to give up everything for love. And so I ultimately rated this 3.5 stars and I enjoyed it. I really did. After which I read Yours Insatiably by Aveda Vice. And I cannot believe that it took me this long to pick it up because I loved Skin, okay? I loved Skin, the first novella where the heroine is a succubus and she's closeted, okay? So she orders services on an app that's akin to like Tinder meets DoorDash for paranormal creatures, and Pi shows up, okay? Pi, who is this beautiful, like masculine Mothman, although Pi is non-binary and uses he, they pronouns. And Skin is that first encounter. In this novella, we get a little bit more of their dynamic at the workplace. And when she's arriving, she's hoping that Pi keeps their mouth shut about it, okay? And oh, I loved this romance for how Pi shows her to embrace her succubus nature and to not be shamed for her sensuality and to actually look into who she is. How Pi introduces her into the monstrous world and all things paranormal, which is something that she shut out. And I love how her sharpness, like their banter, oh my gosh, the argumentative foreplay between them is everything, and he loves when she puts those dominant boots on, okay? I love how her sharpness does dull in this book, and oh, they have a poly dynamic. I love the adventures that they go on, but what he does in terms of just nurturing her was just stand out, and that's what I loved about this novella. It's 4.5 for me. I might even bump it up to a 5. I'm obsessed with them. I wish that they got a full-length novel, but that's okay. No, it's not Skin. I apologize. Skin is not the first novella. I'll throw up the first novella so that you can see them off like goodness. But I love this. I love them. And I want a full book. I want a full book. I could have more of them. Anyway, next I picked up, I apologize. My camera's dying. I might need to come back. I'm doing too much. I'll be back. I apologize. It would be a quick cut for you. I promised a quick cut. Our fortuitous break is over, and it gave me a chance to grab my next read for March, which is Mafia Madman by Mila Finelli. Thank you so much, Lizelle, for sending this to me for my birthday. The physical copy is stunning. I love the cover. Okay, it's stunting. And the read did not disappoint. This is the 4th book in the series, and I have to say I did like it more than I did Mafia Madman. And if you have not read up until this point, I do have timestamps below just in case you don't want to be spoiled for anything, although I don't plan on going entirely in. It's just that the setup of this is inherently kind of a spoiler, so I'll just give you time to do that and click out if you'd like to. But Giulio was set to marry the heroine from the first book, being that he's the heir to Fausto's Mafia empire, and in this book he is on the run. He is out, gay, and in the Mafia, that's very traditional, that's placed a target on his back. And it was so just satiating to see Giulio on the run, but doing it well. Okay, he was so savvy, the way that he is surviving. I loved that. And Alicio is the assassin sniper that has been hired to take him out. I love their dynamic in this book. I devoured this. I love that Alessio is literally the boogeyman to all Mafia heads. And he's never hesitated on a target. Yet when he sees Alessio through his scope, he's smitten. He's just like awestruck and curious and intrigued, taking a lot longer than he normally does to profile and study his targets. When it comes to Alessio, there is a one-night stand situation that turns into a sexy deal that's insatiable and turns to love in this book. Oh, and I did like the sort of like mafia politics. Okay, we have a third act with a quote that really just took me out when it comes to things that we see in third acts, so to speak. But I devoured their dynamic in this book because Giulio is convinced that he can use Alessio's attraction towards him to garner more days, because Alessio is hell-bent on making good on what he's been hired to do, and they just can't help themselves. I loved how dominant Giulio was when it came to the steam, and how Alessio was just a puddle before him. Oh, this was like, I couldn't put it down. I couldn't put it down. And I loved the ending. We got like wee gooey goodness. And like I said, I did enjoy this plot a lot more than the last one. So I'm just here for it. I'm here for it. I loved this. I rated this 4.5. I kind of want to bump it up a little bit just because it was such a fun read for me. I had a really good time with it. So I may need to make some changes to my March monthly wrap up. Anyway, loved this. And then can we just take a moment here to appreciate Wonder on this cover. Okay, Wonder on this cover. It's stunting. I read The Highest Bidder by Sara Cate. Oh, and this is following Ronan Cade. This is a age gap billionaire with a bee hunty romance, okay, where Daisy is working as a waitress at a Salacious Players Club location, and due to a bet that she loses with her coworker, she ends up on the auction block where Ronan Cade, of course, is the highest bidder. And at first he doesn't cash in on his night with her until they have a bit of a run-in, and he learns that she's living in her van in a sort of free bird lifestyle that he deems to be dangerous, and he steps in. And that's what I loved about Ronan Cade. He's actually my favorite hero throughout the entire series. He's incredibly caring. He is this walking wound of a widow who suffered great loss, and he is fed by caring and feeding those that are around him. And that slowly starts to include Daisy, who he doesn't want to push himself on, who he believes may be too young for him, but he just can't help but help her. And I love how they get to know each other. It's a bit of a whirlwind. Okay, we get some travel in this. And how she's slowly trying to maybe uncover the fact that he could have been her late mother's boyfriend. And I just had a great time with Ronan in this book. Daisy, however, did put me through trials. I'm just gonna be quite honest here, okay? I was put through trials because Sara Cate just got me completely on board for this altruistic cinnamon roll of a hero. And I think that for me personally, the secret in this book was held for far too long, but the way that Ronan held space for that and sort of created a situation where they could both grow really saved it, which I think Sara Cate does really well. That's what I loved about Give Me More. How her characters are really made to do the inner work on themselves in order to let in these all-consuming romances that they just get swept up in. I liked that part of this book, but that was definitely initiated by Ronan, and in the end I just felt like I was happy that he was happy. I was happy that he was happy. You know, again, favorite hero within this series, not my favorite romance, but I ultimately ended up rating this a 4. Daisy put me through trials. Okay, she put me through trials. But Ronan is happy, so I'm happy. I had a very interesting time reading this. I was pacing around this house, okay? She had me on board. And so, I'm just happy to have this cover. I cannot wait for the next one. I cannot wait. Next, I read, I believe it was a recommendation from Miss Riley Marie. I am a patron. The World Gives Way by Marissa Levien. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. This is a sci-fi dystopian. This is not a romance, but I will just outright say this is an end of days story, which I completely lap up because of the inherent stakes. And this is set in the future, in space, after the Earth is no longer inhabitable. And this space station really is its own world. It looks like ours. It has different terrain and mimics what our nations would have looked like. I mean, it's a world in space. And we're following a main character who is a maid of a prominent family on the space station that had to do with the formation of it. And she learns that there's a problem with the ship and it's their last days. And I don't want to get into any more than that, but she ends up escaping after their deaths with the baby. And she is slowly being hunted down by the detectives on this ship. And what got me with this book is that she's the only one that knows. She's the only one that knows that it is all of their last days. And I love how she is placed in these different settings and before these other characters and questioning, should she tell them? Because in telling them, that could place her in a position to be captive for her last moments. What is her responsibility to this child? And I love the detective that's following her, because he's really like a paperwork and numbers guy. That's all they've really allowed him to be up until this being his first case. And he really becomes quite, obsessed with her profile and case. But what that does is it showcases how he is able to see the subtext of the situation, that something isn't lining up, that there's something that has compelled her to move in the way that she's moving. And I was riveted by this book, and I just couldn't get over that. I kept questioning, like, what if I was the only person in the world to know that these were our last days? Would I say anything to someone? Would they believe me? There are a lot of questions of morality in this book that I thoroughly enjoyed, and the ending just took me out. The stakes were just so high. Is it possible for them to even get out of this situation? I will not say. But I rated this 4.5 stars and I was just fascinated the entire time. I need to pick up more sci-fi. I am in a sci-fi mood ever since the Webb telescope came back from space and they discovered 6 new galaxies. It's giving Contact. We are living in the movie Contact. I digress. I'm going to move on to the next book. But we are. I'm obsessed. Next, I read Heart Haunt Havoc by Freydis Moon. I saw this going around during the Trans Rights Readathon, and this is a novella. It is horror, and it is a haunted house tale with romance. It's featuring a trans main character who is an exorcist, and I believe their name is Colin. Bishop is the one that's being haunted, living in this home of poltergeist and of secrets. And when Bishop calls Colin in to eradicate the situation, he's not really forthcoming about all that's happening. Colin starts to realize that this isn't going to be such a buttoned up situation. And then there's also the attraction between them and how the spirits and the monsters and the creatures are relating to Bishop, sort of illuminate that there's more to be told in terms of what's going on. And I really enjoyed the Catholic mysticism in this. How Colin has garnered magical authority, if you will. I really liked how religion was brought into the chat and sort of examined. I have found that I've really enjoyed that on the page, like magique with a K specific when it comes to like Black ancestry. I love on the page. Tasha Harrison has a really great small romance that got me into that. And here I loved how that was kind of dismantled, how Bishop's magic, if you will, is brought to the forefront, and how they're slowly sort of getting to know each other and caught up in one another. I wanted this to be a little longer, but I am just incredibly impressed with all of the elements that were brought into it. And I might be into a little bit of horror, okay? I might be into horror because I was lapping this up. There's even a Norse witch in this book. There's so many different elements that I kind of fell for. And so as Colin is trying to eradicate these spirits, we figure out what's going on, how that ties into Bishop's backstory, and also how their abilities were showcased on the page. I was really impressed with. So I'm interested in picking up more, and I will be. I rated this 4 stars. Next, I read Magic Lies and Deadly Pies by Misha Popp. This was me trying to assuage my Finlay Domovina's killing it appetite, because I cannot find anything like it, and I loved this. This is a thriller. Well, it's more of a cozy mystery. I'm going to call this a cozy mystery, and it is centered around a main character that makes murder pies to avenge the harms against women. I loved this. In fact, I really enjoyed how the magic worked in this. The backstory, her lineage, how all of the women in her family line have been able to infuse emotions into items. Hers is baking, and it's not just murder. She is very active within her community, and she can help students feel energized to study for tests through her pies. She is active in the local domestic violence survivors group and can charge her pies with healing and comfort. And so I really liked that. But the backbone of her business, which she doesn't take any money for, are these murder pies. And you have to be recommended by somebody that has received her services before in order to get a pie yourself. And what I loved about this is that she's been able to carve out her own freedom. She runs her small baking business out of her mobile home in this town where she's really like grown some roots. And now someone has come in and is blackmailing to reveal the true nature of her business. And so this is really about her uncovering who's blackmailing her and why. And there's also a strong romance within this. And I ended up rating it 4 stars because I loved all of the social commentary. And I loved how this was really exemplar. I thought she was very smart and stuck to her guns. The conversations about like morality, how she runs her business, how the pies work as well. They're not just gonna murder anyone. They only take out their intended target. So if I were to have a slice, okay, it would just be delicious, but it wouldn't take me out. So I love the moral and ethical conversations, the conversations centered around the plight of women within society, the awareness of domestic violence, as well as how savvy and smart the heroine was. I love how in any story, film, in novels, how our characters are presented with what seems to be only 2 choices, and she's able to work out another way. There's a second book in the series that's out where she will be in a baking competition, and so I'm definitely going to be continuing because I had so much fun with this. I rated this 4 stars. Next, I read, thankfully, I only have 2 books left. My camera keeps dying. Next, I read They Never Learn by Layne Fargo. I will not bury the lead. I rated this 5 stars. It's set in an academic space, and it opens with an English professor murdering one of her star athlete students to avenge a young woman who never got justice for being assaulted by him and all of his fraternity brothers. And we learn that Scarlet has been administering this sort of vigilante justice for over a decade now. This campus is her hunting ground, and now the heat is on. Because of the high profile of the student that she murdered, his parents are now going to be funding a new suicide awareness organization, since that's kind of her flair and moniker to cover up. And with that is going to become an investigation of all of the recent suicides. And while this storyline is unfolding, we get another one, which I found this just to be like structurally interesting, because I was questioning how this new student that's a freshman that's just arriving to the school, how that was going to merge with the main storyline, if you will, and the way that it does it. I just, it was singing for me structurally, because right at the halfway point, we get that blend. And, you know, I did not suspect the twist. I am just now getting back into thrillers, and so I don't know if it's because of when I picked this up. Oh, I raged along with Scarlet at how there are manipulative and coercive male characters in this book, how the women in this book were made to feel powerless and small. And I just loved how Scarlet fashioned herself into a weapon on behalf of those women that were just left to take it. There's something about this that just got me. And I was riveted. I read it in one sitting. I actually listened to it. It became available, okay, through Libby. Thank you. And I just couldn't put it down. I love the very killing Eve, okay? Very killing Eve, if you're familiar with that television show. Romance, heavy on the romance in this book. And her sort of manifesto and how things unraveled. I was captivated by this, and again, I like raged along with her, and it was 2 back-to-back avenging on behalf of women stories, and I ate it up. I wrapped up the month of March with No One Is Watching by Alyssa Cole. I was in a thriller mood. And this book opened up with a quote by Zora Neale Hurston, which completely took me out. If you do not know, Zora Neale Hurston was a Black anthropologist, and her ethnography of the American South is still distinct in my mind just because of the way that she captured language and represents the community and relationships. And I just thought it was a smart choice. It really set a framework for the quite literal horrors of gentrification in this thriller, being that we're following Sydney, our main character. She's living in Brooklyn and she's seeing her neighborhood rapidly change and the quite literal erasure of her community. And this is made evident through a walking tour in the beginning of this book that is through her neighborhood that fails to highlight the Black contributions in terms of history. And it sparks a fire underneath her to start her own tour, which is how she meets Theo, okay, who she believes to be engaged. And there is a heavy romance plot in this thriller as well. But this is really about her working with Theo as she's creating this tour, and we get to know those that are still in the neighborhood and see how they're slowly starting to go missing. What could possibly be happening? How? And I loved the pacing of this because it really felt eerie. And Sydney doesn't really trust her own mind. She knows something is happening, but because of her own backstory, I love how she almost questions what she's seeing and how she weaves in all of the historical elements when it comes to racial redlining and the history that's omitted in the beginning in that tour. I was not expecting what came out of this, and for this to have such a strong romance. I was lapping that up. I rated this 4 stars. I thought that this was well done, and I had a very almost harrowing time with it. I love the conversations that arose. I love the community aspect of it as well. And also the ending. The ending reminded me of what I enjoy from films that are not in our domestic market, that are a little more realistic when it comes to not being buttoned up just so and having all of the answers, which was incredibly sobering and fitting for the themes that were in this thriller. I really enjoyed it. And I think we are done in terms of my wrap up on all my thoughts for what I picked up in the month of March. Full, spoiler alert, I read 22 books. I believe my vlog for the Romance Takeover Readathon is up now. I normally don't talk about the books that I go over in vlogs. And I will be coming out with a March monthly stats video where I'll be sharing all of the beautiful book mail that I got and my favorites, as well as all of the additions that I got for my library. So I want to thank you for joining me, and please consider subscribing and sticking around for the next one. And I'll see you later. Bye.